I had no idea what I was getting into when I accepted that night guard job at the museum. After months of job hunting, I couldn't be picky. The place was grand but unsettling, like stepping back in time. During the day, it buzzed with school tours and chattering visitors, but at night, it was dead silent. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air vents and the creaking of the old building settling. My supervisor gave me a quick tour, rattling off the usual rules: monitor the cameras, check the doors, and, half-jokingly, always respect the exhibits. I remember chuckling awkwardly at that. If only I knew. My first night started out boring. I walked through the halls, shining my flashlight over ancient artifacts and mannequins dressed in period clothing. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. At first, I brushed it off, maybe an echo of my own steps. But the sound continued, coming from the Victorian exhibit. When I got there, everything looked normal, except one of the mannequins seemed off. It was facing a different direction than before, its glassy eyes staring down the hall. I convinced myself it was just a trick of memory, or maybe some kid had knocked it over during the day. As the night dragged on, the stillness grew heavier. I was doing my rounds when a loud thud echoed from the fossil exhibit. My heart jumped. I rushed over, expecting to find something simple, a fallen sign, maybe. But when I got there, the skull of a dinosaur lay on the ground. The strange part, the rest of the skeleton stood intact, but its head was now twisted, like it had been watching me. I stood there, frozen, flashlight shaking in my hand. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe I was just tired. By the second night, the museum's shadows felt thicker. I started noticing small things, cases slightly open, objects not quite where they should be. The air felt heavier, like I was being watched. Then, around 2 a.m., I checked the security monitors. My blood ran cold. On the screen, one of the medieval suits of armor was moving, just barely, but enough to notice. I ran to the corridor, expecting to find an empty hall. The armor was there, perfectly still, but I swear those empty eye slits were watching me. By the third night, I was on edge before even starting my shift. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, maybe sleep deprivation messing with my head, but everything felt off. The air felt heavier, the silence deeper, almost like the museum was holding its breath. Every creak of the wooden floors made me jump. As I walked past the Hall of Antiquities, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. One of the glass cases was open. It had been locked the night before. Inside, ancient artifacts were slightly rearranged, like someone or something had been there. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At one point, I swear I saw a shadow move just out of the corner of my eye. My flashlight flickered as I made my way to the ritual exhibit. Something about that room had always made my skin crawl. Tonight, though, it felt like the walls were pressing in. The centerpiece, a creepy wooden totem with hollow eyes, seemed different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt alive. And worse, it felt like it was looking right through me. Around 3 a.m., I decided to check the security footage again, just to prove to myself that I was imagining things. But as the screens flickered on, my heart dropped. In the camera view of the medieval wing, the suits of armor weren't just moving. They were standing in a circle, facing each other. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. When I looked back, the screen was static. My gut twisted. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed to that wing, heart pounding. When I got there, the suits were back in their usual spots, motionless, but the dust on the floor was disturbed, like something, or someone, had been there. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it. A low, almost inaudible whisper. It was coming from the ritual room. My feet felt like lead, but I forced myself to move. As I entered, the totem had shifted again, now in the center of the room. Around it, artifacts from other exhibits were arranged in a circle. Chalices, masks, ancient weapons. They hadn't been there before. My breath caught in my throat. The whispering grew louder, but I couldn't understand the words. It felt like a presence was filling the room, pressing down on me. I tried to back away, but it felt like the room was closing in on me. Every step I took seemed heavier, like I was walking through thick air. The whispering grew louder, almost rhythmic, though the words were still incomprehensible. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, the totem's hollow eyes seemed to glint. Panic surged through me. I turned and bolted out of the room, barely able to keep my breath steady. As I reached the hallway, the whispering stopped. Dead silence. That was almost worse. It felt like the museum was waiting for something. I made my way to the security office, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking as I scanned the cameras, hoping to see something, anything that would make sense. But what I saw on the screens made my blood run cold. The exhibits were moving, not all at once, but subtly, methodically. The mannequins in the Victorian room had shifted, facing the hallway. The medieval armor was no longer in its display. On the screen for the ritual room, the totem was gone. My eyes darted to the feed showing the hallway outside the office. There it was, standing right outside the door. I couldn't breathe. My eyes were glued to the screen, my mind racing. It was just standing there, perfectly still, like it was waiting for me to make a move. I turned off the monitor, trying to convince myself that I was hallucinating, that maybe the stress was getting to me. But then there was a knock on the door, a soft, deliberate knock. I froze. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's not real." But the knocking didn't stop. It got louder, more insistent. Suddenly, everything went quiet again. The air felt heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I didn't dare move. I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then, the lights in the office flickered. For a split second, the room went completely dark, and when the lights came back on, I saw it. The totem was inside the office, standing in the corner. My heart felt like it stopped. I couldn't look away. Its hollow eyes were fixed on me, and for the first time, I understood the whispering. It wasn't just noise. It was calling my name. I backed into the desk, my legs barely holding me up. The whispering grew louder, the words blending into a low hum that filled the room. I couldn't understand them, but they felt like a warning, or a threat. My mind was racing. How had it gotten in here? I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't seen anything on the cameras. It was just there. I reached for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I shone the beam on the totem, the light seemed to bend around it, like it was swallowing the glow. Then it moved. Not much, just a slight tilt of the head, but it was enough to send a cold shock through me. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. I knew I had to get out, but every part of me felt paralyzed. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. The whispering was deafening now, echoing in my head. I finally forced myself to move, bolting for the door. I flung it open, expecting to find the hallway empty, but instead, the corridor was lined with mannequins and suits of armor, all facing me, their eyes following my every move. I froze. The hallway that had been empty just minutes ago was now a gauntlet of motionless figures, each one staring me down. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. I knew I had to move, but the weight of those unseeing eyes pinned me to the spot. The whispering hadn't stopped. It was coming from all around now, like the walls themselves were speaking. Each step forward felt like a gamble, like one wrong move would make them come to life. I kept my flashlight pointed ahead, avoiding their faces, afraid of what I might see if I looked too closely. Halfway down the hallway, I heard a scrape behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. One of the suits of armor had shifted. Its sword, once by its side, was now raised slightly. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body felt like it was wading through molasses. I forced myself to keep moving, eyes fixed on the exit at the end of the hall. Just a few more steps. Then, all at once, the whispering stopped. The silence was worse, thicker, heavier. I turned back around, and the totem was there, standing in front of the exit, blocking my only way out. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. The totem stood motionless, but the air around it seemed to ripple, like heat coming off pavement. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I glanced over my shoulder. The mannequins and armor were still there, but I could feel them watching, waiting. I had no choice. I had to get past the totem. Steeling myself, I took a step forward. Then another. My palms were slick with sweat, and every muscle in my body screamed at me to turn and run. But where could I go? There was no way out. As I got closer, the whispering started again, soft at first, then rising to a chorus of hushed voices. My name, over and over, in a language I didn't understand but somehow knew. I felt the pressure building, like the room itself was pushing in on me. The totem's hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I swear I saw them narrow, just slightly. Without thinking, I lunged forward, trying to shove it aside, but the moment my hands touched it, a searing pain shot through me. My vision blurred. For a split second I saw something, visions of ancient rituals, blood, fire, people chanting in a circle. Then, darkness. I came to on the cold marble floor, my head pounding and the air thick with that awful whispering. The totem was gone. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented, my flashlight lying a few feet away, its beam flickering weakly. The hallway was empty now. The mannequins, the suits of armor, all gone. It was just me, standing in the suffocating silence. I didn't know if I had passed out for seconds or minutes. I just knew I had to get out. My feet felt like lead as I made my way toward the exit, every step echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. As I reached the front door, I grabbed the handle, praying it would open. Locked. I jiggled it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, the whispering growing louder, filling every corner of the room. I turned around slowly. The exhibits were back, lined up in perfect rows, facing me. But they were different now. Their faces, mannequins, statues, suits of armor, all twisted, eyes hollow and dark. They were watching, waiting. The whispering grew deafening, like 1,000 voices in my head. And then the totem appeared again, right in the center of the room. I backed up against the door, my hands still clawing at the handle. It was useless. The totem stood there, silent and still, but the whispering, God, the whispering, felt like it was drilling into my skull. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, a warning, a threat, or maybe both. The exhibits around the room seemed closer now, the once familiar figures now twisted into something sinister. Their empty eyes bore into me, and I swear I saw the faintest movements, subtle shifts, slight tilts of heads. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, plunging the room into an even heavier silence. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through a wet cloth. Then the totem moved. Its head turned slowly, almost mechanically, until it was staring right at me. My legs refused to move, but every instinct screamed at me to run. The room felt like it was closing in, the exhibits pressing closer. And then, in one horrifying moment, the totem lifted an arm, slowly, deliberately, and pointed directly at me. The whispering started again, louder than ever, like it was coming from inside my head. I couldn't breathe. The totem's outstretched arm felt like a death sentence, the hollow eyes drilling into me. My body was frozen, every muscle locked in place. The whispering grew so loud it felt like it was vibrating in my bones. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me, echoing through my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to shut it all out, but I could still feel the weight of the totem's gaze, like an invisible force pressing down on me. Then the whispering stopped. I opened my eyes, heart pounding, and the totem was gone. The exhibits were back in their cases, perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. The air was heavy with an eerie silence, but something was different. I felt a presence, like the room was watching me. I stumbled toward the security office, desperate for any sense of normalcy. As I stepped inside and locked the door, I noticed the monitors were showing static. Every single camera, just static. My name echoed softly in the room, whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stood there, staring at the static-filled monitors, heart hammering in my chest. My name, whispered from every corner of the room, filled my head. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, but the office was empty, just the hum of the monitors and the faint flicker of the overhead light. I backed into the desk, trying to steady my breathing. "It's in my head," I muttered to myself. "Just in my head." But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something was in here with me. Then, the static on one of the monitors flickered. For a brief moment, an image appeared, a live feed of the ritual exhibit. The totem was there, but it was different, taller, darker. Its eyes glowed faintly, and behind it, the exhibits weren't just standing there anymore. They were moving, gathering around the totem like they were part of some ancient, twisted ritual. I blinked, and the image was gone, replaced by static again. My blood ran cold. I knew I had to get out, but every exit was locked. My only choice was to go back into the museum and face whatever was waiting for me. My legs felt like they were moving on their own as I stumbled back into the hallway. The silence was oppressive, pressing in from all sides. The exhibits were where they should be, but something felt wrong, like the whole building was holding its breath. I kept my flashlight low, the beam cutting through the darkness, every shadow seeming to stretch and shift. My ears strained for any sound, any sign of movement. All I could hear was my own ragged breathing. I turned a corner and froze. The totem was there, right in the middle of the hallway. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Its hollow eyes were fixed on me, and I could feel it, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The air around it seemed to shimmer, and I swear I saw the walls behind it warp and twist. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. The whispering started again, rising in volume, a chorus of voices in a language I couldn't understand but somehow knew was ancient and filled with menace. My name echoed in the whispers, growing louder, more insistent. The whispering felt like it was inside my head, rattling my thoughts, each word like a needle piercing my mind. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to take a step back. Then another. The totem didn't move, but I could feel its presence growing, filling the hallway with a suffocating weight. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, everything around me seemed to blur. The walls, the exhibits, everything melted into shadow, leaving only the totem, looming larger than before. I don't know what made me run, but I did. I turned and sprinted down the hallway, the whispers following me, growing louder with every step. My footsteps echoed like gunshots, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I rounded a corner, almost tripping over my own feet, and saw the main entrance ahead. The door was still locked, but I didn't care. I slammed into it, pounding on the glass, screaming for help. The museum was still dark, silent, as if the entire building was wrapped in some terrible spell. I pounded on the glass, my fists bruising, but the door didn't budge. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I spun around, back pressed to the door, and saw the totem standing at the end of the hallway, closer than before. The exhibits flanking it had moved. Statues, mannequins, armor, all standing in perfect alignment, facing me. Their eyes, hollow and lifeless, felt like they were drilling into me. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind racing. There was no way out. The whispering grew deafening, an unbearable cacophony. I clutched my head, trying to block it out, but it was inside me. The totem started moving, gliding toward me without taking a step. The exhibits followed, their movements stiff and jerky, like puppets on invisible strings. I was paralyzed, my body frozen in place. My mind screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. The totem's hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a pull, a deep primal fear that reached into the core of my being.